When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and I'm joined today by Maderson Quinlog, who is the founder, I assume, and chief, head honcho at Magik Press. And we're going to talk about her work, the work that Magik Press does, and also about art and the community. So it will be maybe meandering. I have to admit, Allie, that when I looked at the Magik Press website, I thought, I'm usually like kind of a sequential person, and I thought, where do I start? There's really a lot here.
I do a lot.
So I'll start really easily and ask you, how did you get started with this? What's your background, and how did you get where you are?
Well, I mean, this whole art thing started when I was a very young child. Family lore is that I was drawing kind of before I could even speak. And so I always kind of say that like visual art was my first language. And that I did a drawing that was so good that my mom like made me try to show her where I had traced it, and I hadn't traced it, I had just done it. And, art runs in my family. I'm of Irish descent, so art was always very celebrated, whether it be visual art. My grandfather was a painter and a watercolorist, and we had his work in our home, and my grandmother had it in her home. And we were like always swapping poetry and stories, and my Uncle Tim was a guitar player, so really that's where this began, is just that art was always a part of my life, and it was just a passion. And I love to share it too with other people, and so it's led me to Magik Press.
So I remember when you started Magik Press in New London, I don't know how many years ago.
5. We actually just had our 5th anniversary in January.
So, as I said, I went to the Magik Press website, and there is really a lot there. So, what does Magik Press do in summary, and then we can talk about everything in more detail.
So I call Magik Press a community micro press. And when I say micro press, I mean that when we print books, it's usually under 100 edition. So I print usually 100 or less copies. Now I have printed more for custom clients and stuff like that, but I also do a lot of artist books, which are one of a kind or very small editions. I usually do an edition of 13. Magik Press for me, the magic in Magik Press is not just an affectation. It's not a brand. I actually believe that like art is a form of magic that we have on earth with us today, because I believe like magic is creation, and we create something from nothing to make art, right? Or it's coming through us, or through, however you believe, whatever your spiritual path is. And for me, art is a tool to do that. And then the community part is really important to me too, because I believe in the artist's responsibility to their community to share art and to share the power of art. And I think that also goes back to my Irish upbringing, which I learned from a very early age that about service to the community, that, you know, part of our reason to be on earth was to like love through service. It was really kind of instilled in me at an early age. And art and love are like that. So art, love, and service, I guess, is the triangle of Magik Press.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that, but that sounds great. Now, in your description, I guess, of your background and of what Magik Press does, I saw the term multimedia, and it seemed as though it was multi in many dimensions. It wasn't just a matter of I do charcoal and acrylics. It's, you know, it spans the different, not just the different visual media, but the arts, you know, from one end to the other. So I'm not sure where to start, maybe on visual arts and maybe some of the installations you've done. We do have some photos. I don't know. I don't know exactly what order we'll see them in, but maybe it'll be a surprise if you could share them, and then you can talk about what went behind them.
Sure. I would say that my personal practice is usually based in photography, and I think books and photography go hand in hand, and also printmaking is a part of photography. Or printmaking and it's kind of printmaking, photography, bookbinding. And bookbinding is one of those things that it was like, oh, it just combines a lot of everything. And so I'm just a very curious person. Okay, so I would say this is probably one of my favorite pieces. This is called Ariadne. And I made it at iPark, which is in Haddam, Connecticut. I did a residency there in 2017. For a month in the fall, and I would collect ferns in the mornings, and then I would print cyanotypes, which is what this blue print is. This is also a self-portrait when I had short hair, which is kind of fun to look at. And it was just one of those pieces where I had found this antique linen with the gorgeous hand-done lace a few years before, and I took it with me to iPark. And then the cyanotype is a chemistry that I can mix and then apply to any natural surface. It was just a really beautiful print. And then I had found this frame as well, and I'd use this frame in other installations. I'd put TV screens in it. But I was thinking about like spiders and webs, and the story of Ariadne, it's a Greek myth. And she's a weaver that actually like boasts about being better than Athena at weaving. And, you know, there's like there's the humility story in there, right? And yeah, but like, I love this piece. And so this is an installation that I did with Emily Barassi, who is a photographer and filmmaker in New London. And she's made the film, and it projects onto like this installation that I made with all kinds of, I'm a collector. So I just like find interesting things on the side of the road or antique stores or thrift stores. And I just kind of make these worlds with them. It's very childlike actually, but I want to invite people into my world and like create these worlds. There's like a piece of lace, and so you could walk into that room, and there was a whole other secondary installation, but not everybody would cross that threshold. So I like to create moments where, like, if you're curious enough and you're willing to maybe break the rules of the gallery, you get an extra surprise. Like if you open a box, maybe you'll find something inside of it, right?
Reminds me, I was a toddler teacher for many years, and you know, kids between the age of 12 and 24 months, which was the first year of their life that they were looking outward. You know, the first year you're kind of figuring out who you are inwardly, and like the first time it would snow, or you got to experience with them vicariously, experiencing the world for the first time, and you know that. idea of having this like little forbidden door just sounds very 15-month-oldish.
I love that because I think maybe like most of the artists that I know who have been artists lifelong, we're very childlike sometimes because art gives us a chance to just like discover like that again and again. And I think that's like for me, I was actually just speaking with a friend of mine about music actually. And he and I have both kind of gotten into music recently, and that there's just no end, that I could study it for 1,000 years if I could live 1,000 years over 1,000 lifetimes, and there still would never be an end to like what I could discover about it. And that's kind of the wonder of art that I feel like I want to share in community, right? It's like that feeling, we all really need that feeling right now.
I think we all,
yeah, all the time.
Yeah, we all always need it, but now maybe we feel like we've lost it. And you were talking about discovering new things. I don't think I've ever met anyone else who works in cyanotype. So how did you discover it, and really, what is it?
Sure. So my undergraduate degree is in photography, and I studied at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and I studied under a wonderful guy named Phil Moody. He's from Scotland, and he, with kind of a group of rogue Scottish photographers, rediscovered a lot of these old formulas from like Fox Talbot, and now I'm forgetting the guy who invented cyanotype. I'm a little nervous. But so cyanotype came to me during like my junior year of college, and I really loved its. So I'm kind of a sloppy technician, and it's one of these medias that's you don't have to be super neat for it to come out great. Like that's why I like use cyanotype in community too, is because like a 3-year-old and an 80-year-old can make beautiful cyanotypes together, whether they've ever done it before. And so I learned from Phil Moody a bunch of alternative processes. And so cyanotype and was the one that I kind of came back to, and it became kind of an integral part of my practice in 2007 when I gave birth to my son, and I was breastfeeding, and I couldn't go into the dark room and mess with all those chemicals while I was pregnant and breastfeeding. And so cyanotype I could. And also with an infant, I don't know if you know this, but if with an infant, you have like a couple hours here and a couple hours there. And so I could do it out on my front porch while he was napping, and it was it allowed me to continue doing photography as a mom. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting, because so many new moms, and I was there too, just your whole life gets all shifted around.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we talked, let's see some more pictures of some more installations, because we have quite a bit of art to show.
Okay, yeah. So this is the whale, and this is a piece that I did actually for Casey Moran's book release a few years ago. I think that was in 2018. And he gave a bunch of us chapters. And the chapter that I got, the whale was part of that. And so I found this old Dutch print, I think, of a beached whale. And I always kind of thought it was strange in New London that they celebrate whaling, because I'm not a super big fan of whaling and the genocide of whales that happened. But so this was kind of my response to the whaling city. Yeah, and it's stained with coffee. That's what gives it. That's why I like cyanotypes too, is you can tone it. So after I print it, it's this really bright, brilliant blue, but I can leave it in coffee overnight, and it turns kind of like a deeper, richer tone.
So I have to ask, the text says on Stonehenge paper. What's Stonehenge paper?
Stonehenge paper is just a printmaking paper. It's a brand, but it's kind of like it's a very old brand. And printmakers, if you say Stonehenge paper, you know what it is because it can hold up to water. So with cyanotype, I have to rinse it with water a lot, and so the paper has to be able to like withhold that. So printmaking papers just hold up to water better, and it's just a pretty color. Oh, and here's the staircase. This is the secret staircase, and if you know where it is, you know where it is.
And I don't, but so it will remain a secret, but I know a little bit about what it looks like now.
Yeah, and so this was an exhibition that I did, let's see, this was an exhibition with Gabby Shea, and then also I included artists. I do an annual Halloween zine, and so I included art from artists in that zine, and the piece that you see is the face. That is a local artist named Jared, and I'm blanking on your name, I'm so sorry. And then I can't remember who's at the end of the hall, but yeah, so it was kind of frightening, spooky themed art. And then we do shows in the staircase as well. So I had an opening, and so you can see there's just art around. I think this is a different show where I was showing some collage as well. That's a collage of mine. Oh no, that is Gabby's work too, next to mine. So, so that's the same show. Currently, there's a photo show in there of instant photography that I've used a land camera for about 13 years, and I'm just about to run out of that film because they don't make that film anymore.
No, they don't. I'm surprised, that you still have some.
Mm-hmm. I have one box left. 10 shots.
Oh man, that's kind of pressure to like make them good.
I
You'll
know.
Never,
it kind of makes
the
me want to
last
like
chance.
take all bad pictures with them, just because I'm that kind of person. No good pictures in the last box.
Yeah, and then some ceremonial burial or ceremony to end that era.
Maybe I'll bronze the camera since I can't use it anymore.
That's true. It could become an art piece of some sort.
Yeah. It'll just get added to a future installation. Okay, so this is the same show, and where the candles are, there's actually pieces from an artist in Pittsburgh named Jasper Elgie. And then in the back there, our dear friend who passed away, Carrie Bolger, that is a piece that she gave me when I moved into Magik Press. And it was in the second or third edition of the Halloween zine. And so it was really nice to be able to honor our friend there. And then people would perform, and you can see there's an amp at the top. So when we have performances in the staircase, and there's Jeff Butler playing with his lovely dog, Pumpkin. This was our first show. And Jeff has just been so generous with me. Like I said, I just got into music, and he's a teacher. He's a music teacher as well. And he's just been really encouraging, and he helped me find a key that I could sing in, which I guess is kind of important.
Yeah, it's probably essential, but I guess it speaks a little bit to like what the art community is like in New London, because there is a piece of it that seems to be very supportive of artists.
Well, artists are always supporting artists, right? Artists for artists. And I think it's because we know the struggle. We know each other's struggle, so we tend to be very generous with each other and trust each other. And when you make art together, it's a community builder. Like just the simple act of sitting down and like crocheting right next to somebody else who's crocheting, or quilting circles are known for this. There's this way that like making art together is a really vulnerable, intimate space to share. And so, a lot of my friends, I don't know if about all my friends. I would say most of my friends are creative in some way, whether it's professionally or not. Yeah.
And you talked about the struggles, but New London, we talked a little before the show, New London isn't unique, but although like the arts community, visual arts, music, theater, are really important to the, I don't know, social life, spiritual life, economic life, cultural life of the city, I think a lot of individual artists really are struggling, and it seems like it's getting harder now, not easier.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, artists are not unaffected by politics, the economy, but we are uniquely affected in that under capitalism and under white supremacist capitalism, which is what we live under in the United States, arts are completely devalued, or they become a luxury good to be traded just like stocks. And so there's no survival there. There's no way to survive, really. I mean, I can think back to when I graduated in my undergraduate in 2002, I still knew middle-class working artists. A lot of crafters. I was really into pottery at that point. I worked as a potter for a few years. And I knew potters who could go to 4 or 5 big pottery shows, national shows a year. They had a couple of patrons that would buy a piece from them every year, and then they would get an NAE grant, National Arts Endowment grant, and they could pay a mortgage with that. That was possible 30 years ago, and that's simply not possible now. Because, artists are kind of, we have been targeted by, I mean, if you think about the National Arts Endowment, part of the reason that it was targeted in the 90s and defunded horribly in the 90s is because of the success of the ACT UP AIDS activism. I grew up, I remember that was like my first awareness that, being an artist also meant that you were going to be opposing a pretty harsh, violent system. And so artists have suffered, like everybody. And often we're freelancers, so we don't have a lot of labor protections. Or we're working in jobs, like a barista or a restaurant worker or a retail or a service worker, because those jobs give us this flexibility to do our art.
Although they barely give you a means to live.
They barely do, but you know what they used to? You used to be able to have a coffee job and squat in a place with 10 other artists, and it wasn't extravagant living, but you could be a young struggling artist. If you think of the stories of Patti Smith in New York, right? You used to be able to kind of just get by as an artist with those part-time jobs and still have the time for your art practice. And now people have to have 3 or 4 jobs just to pay rent. And so there's no time to make art. And I mean, that's kind of a part of the reason that I created Magik Press is I wanted to give people a space to do that, because I think I'm 44, and a lot of young people 30 and under, they have no time for anything for themselves anymore because they're just worked to death. And there's no advancement. There's no, it's hard to get a mortgage. Unless you have generational wealth or you get really lucky, it's extremely hard to be an artist. And most of us do it for the love of it. And so it makes it kind of easy to take advantage of us, I think, too. And that's one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for artists and artists' rights, is that we would do it for free if we could. And I think in some old societies we did.
There were societies in which artists had patrons.
Yeah.
And probably some societies where just it was part of the, I don't know if you'd call it a government exactly, but whatever formal social structure there was.
Well, the bards of Ireland, I'm thinking of, right?
They were subsidized.
They were the law keepers. They kept the history. If you had a dispute, you didn't go to a judge, you didn't go to a king, you went to a bard. And
we should maybe go back to that.
I mean, I don't like to give any one group of people too much power. But I think because being a bard was a calling rather than a position, and they served all of society, right? And, I think it goes back to like indigenous cultures too, that like art, the people who make art, there is a connection to art and the spirit that I think indigenous cultures recognize. And I mean, I was always taught like you feed the bard. And so a lot of times I bring food for my friends to shows if I know they're playing, because it's just kind of like, it's a cultural thing, like that, it's an exchange that I understood. If I'm listening to somebody sing, like they're giving me something really important. And so why wouldn't I take care of them? Because they give me something that I can't give myself.
And yet we see so much. I see in New London, which is still pretty culturally rich, but I see a lot of artists who like are getting pushed out because not only living space, but studio space and display space and performance space is all, well, like the art itself is kind of on a commodified level now. So those, kind of low quality but available places that used to be available, I think aren't.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely one of the problems that New London has in common with a lot of other cities who want to have a vibrant art scene but don't seem to know how to take care of artists is that there's a landlord problem. And I can't really speak deeply to that, but I've done some organizing with, people. And I think, I remember bringing up the problem of rent in a meeting about arts many years ago and being laughed at and being told that's not actually an arts issue. But if artists can't live and eat, then how the heck are we supposed to have a vibrant art city?
Yeah.
Like, you got to take care of us. And we really, if you give artists $1,000, you're going to get so much value out of that, because we know how to like do so much with so little. And, I think there's like this barrier of trust sometimes where like people are like, but what is art anyway? I don't really understand it. And so they have a hard time seeing the value in it because they can't like commodify it. I say that like art resists capitalism in this very specific way, is that like it's undefinable. And like you and I have talked about like zoning, like, right. Okay, so we have an art district, but what does that actually mean? Like, who's benefiting? Where's the money going? When the money is going to all these nonprofits and they're basically gatekeepers, so they get a grant for like $2 million, but maybe only 10,000 of that goes directly to artists, where I'd love to see it flipped around the other way. Like the big institution can get to $10,000 for distributing the other, 190, like 1,090,000 or 900,000. I don't know. I'm an artist. I don't do math. Actually, you know what? That's not true. I love math. I just can't do it off the top of my head.
No, but I think the part of what's happened with modern life, and I did work for nonprofits actually almost my whole working life, and it became really a strain that things had to be documented to the point that the last year I worked for Head Start, I was a home visitor. I had 12 students. I visited them in their home every week, and I ran a play group. And I was pretty good at paperwork, but it got insane, the amount of paperwork. We were doing health paperwork, education paperwork, social service, everything. And I mentioned that I was having trouble keeping up with it, and my supervisor said, well, if you really need to, you can cancel home visits to do paperwork. And I thought, wait a minute,
Where
do you
have we
want
gone,
me
right?
to like stop the real work I'm doing in order to document what I'm doing? So if it's a trade-off, do you actually do the work or do you write about the work? Like, I want to do it.
Yeah, and that's why I actually, you know, I think that nonprofits are based on capitalist structure. They're based on a corporate structure. That's why they have a board. And so ultimately, there's going to be a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of waste. And I just happen to believe in giving money, if it's resources, let's just say not even money, but resources directly to the people who need them. And I believe that the people who need those resources know best how to use those resources. And we don't need the gatekeepers, right? We don't need like the institutions determining who's the artist that deserves $1,000 versus who's the artist that deserves $10,000, because that just makes that's a recipe for corruption. And then also the bureaucracy where you're talking about, where you're doing the paperwork instead of the work. So one thing I saw that it made me feel just so bananas when I saw it, is that an institution, and I'm not going to name names, but an institution in New Haven, who I had worked for, who could never offer me any kind of anything more than like $10 an hour if I was lucky to teach. $15, I think, when they finally raised the minimum wage. But a lot of times they were asking me to work for free, because everybody worked for free there because it was a nonprofit. I saw a job offering for a grant writer that was paying $40 an hour for a grant writer. So you're paying a grant writer more than you're paying the artist who you need to have the gallery in the first place. And that, to me, is insanity. I have no other word for that.
It's a big systemic mess. Even with my work in early childhood education, which was very different, that same systemic situation applied. For many years, my wages went up every time minimum wage went up, and I needed to have a college degree to do what I was doing.
Yeah.
And beyond just the paper that was a degree, you needed to have some skills, and once again the pay was just, I couldn't have been a single person living on that pay.
Right, and so systems are not failing. Systems are working as they were intended, in my opinion. And there's this, we call it the nonprofit industrial complex. And if you look at the history of nonprofits and how they were started, and what they were a response to, if we can see them as agents of systematic oppression. We don't like to see that because a lot of us work for them. I do. I'll admit it. I work for them. That's how I make part of my living. But it is a system that was created because of the success of community, grassroots, organized fundraising, and especially by Black Panther Party and other radical groups who basically funded their own community centers and funded their own galleries and funded their own centers. And I genuinely believe that part of the reason that nonprofits were created was to undermine that work and to take money away from the communities. And so what you have are these usually white-run organizations working in non-white spaces, and all the resources have to filter through these white-run spaces, and they dictate who deserves that money. And that's just another system. And so Magik Press really was built as, I'm not a nonprofit, intentionally so. I wouldn't say I'm a for-profit either. I would like to make a living. And I want to have enough money that if somebody in the community comes to me and is like, hey, I need to pay my rent, I'm kind of hungry, could you buy me some groceries, that I can support that. And most artists really, we just want to be able to live and make our art. And we don't need to make gobs of money to do that. We just need communities that support us having the time to work on our art instead of working ourselves to death. Because I know so many artists that they work 3 or 4 jobs and then they go home and they're just so tired that they have no energy left for their work. And that's really, really, it's dehumanizing in some ways, especially when then these institutions with millions of dollars turn around and ask us to work for free. And that, it's painful because they couldn't exist without us.
Yeah, it's a tough issue, and I think a lot of us are navigating how to function in the capitalist system in a way that is ethical or feels right. It's kind of a tightrope walk. I think that it's important to survive and do the work, but on the other hand, we don't want to enable the perpetuation of what's wrong with it.
Yeah, and it's we have to stop thinking of it too as an individual problem, because I think the only way we get out of this system is to stop thinking as individuals. And that's why the community is so important to me. And when I say community can mean a lot of things. It's not always about proximity, although I think local community can be really important. But artists particularly are globally connected. And we're globally connected to struggles, And I think that's why sometimes we're targeted, is because we are sometimes making work that is fighting these systems and really getting through. And these systems are afraid of us. And so they're coming at us at economically, psychologically too. Think about the first thing that you think when you think about artists.
I don't know, individuals, I guess.
Okay, well, a lot of times as an artist, what I've experienced, particularly in America, is when I introduce myself and people ask me, oh, what do you do? Right? Because that's a very American question. What do you do? And I'll say, well, I'm an artist. And they'll say, ha, do you make money that way? Tell me what you really do. How do you really survive? Or they'll make a crack about starving artists, right? And I've heard that since I was middle school, I think is the first time I internalized it, that oh, I'm not going to be able to make any money as an artist. But I lived in Japan for 3 years. And when I would introduce myself to an artist as an artist in Japan, usually the question would be oh, that's wonderful. How do you make your art? What do you make? Tell me about your art. And it took me living outside the United States to realize what a toxic idea about art we have in the United States. And when I came back, it really changed me. And I think that's probably when that was the seed of Magik Press.
Well, you're a teacher as well, as an artist, and I've seen art education in schools very often now seen as a perk maybe, or something a little superfluous.
If that.
Unless there are some that have art tracks.
Sure.
But, very often, like, STEM is the thing, and whether they put the A in to make it STEAM or not, it's like, well, we might put it in if it sounds good. But it's really, but, back to, the multi part, people learn, kids learn in different ways, and art is one way, the arts is one way that, you can reach people through multiple ways of processing info.
Oh, yeah. So at RISD, I have my master's in teaching and learning in art and design. And basically all that means is that like I learned about arts learning. Like that's what I studied. My thesis was actually on the imperative of activist pedagogy in art education. And pedagogy is just a really fancy word, I'm sure you know, for like curriculum design, teaching, basically. And so like what I discovered during my research into that thesis is that like arts learning is so expansive, like, and so accessible in so many directions. And it really is such a shame that we have only begun to add arts into that STEAM. And I've seen it STEM, all capital letters with little a, art. And that made me be like, are you kidding me? Because let me tell you this, as an artist who has studied every, I'm trying to think if I've done glass blowing, I've done ceramics, I've done sculpture, steel, copper, jewelry, gold. I've worked with almost every material that there is that you could work with as an artist. And every single thing that I've studied chemistry. There's chemistry in photography. There's physics in bookbinding. You could study every single subject from math to history to the social sciences, you can, in a single painting. So I actually think it should be arts first learning, because if you're learning their arts, you're actually going to be in contact with everything. And another thing I think that's important with arts learning is that arts instills curiosity and it embraces failure. And that's, I think, something that's missing, particularly from Western education, is that we are so afraid to fail that we actually stop learning. There's so many adults that just stop learning when they're done with school. And it's because there's that fear. Like I find it very hard to teach adults art sometimes without doing a ton of emotional labor and, sifting through, oh, I'm not an artist. I can't even draw a straight line. And I'm like, well, that's fine. It's very hard to draw a straight line for me without a ruler. That's what tools are for, right? And because there's just this like, I'm not that, right? And I'm always just like, one of the best things for me about teaching is when you see somebody like that, like discovery, where it's like, oh, something broke, something didn't go the way I wanted to, but something really interesting happened. And that's the art of failure.
Now we have some more pictures that we send that people, so what's happening here?
Okay, so again, this is, I have started to, as an artist, I have to build failure into my work because I want to be a perfectionist. And I rob myself of the joy of art by being a perfectionist. And so when I work with nature, I have no control. And so these are, I call them my ice prints. And they are cyanotype prints on paper, on various different papers. This is on a washi paper or a rice paper that's very transparent. And so I take my prints in the winter because I can't actually print because I use sun to print. And in Connecticut, there's not enough sun to print in the winter. And so I freeze them and I put them in the snow. And you can see like the edges of these. I use the like leftover containers from Danishes to make this shape.
Recycle, reuse.
Yeah, that's part of like, and that's why I like cyanotype 2 is because it is environmentally friendly, non-toxic. And this is this is forsythia, is what that flower is. So that is actually not a photograph, it's a photogram. And the only difference is a photogram is made from a direct print where a photograph is made with a negative. And you can see there even like the paper tour. Okay, and so these are actually, the ice is melted. So they did this really interesting thing where they kind of curved into the snow. And I mean, these are things I can't predict, and this is like the joy of it. I love it so much. It hasn't snowed enough really to do that. And then one of them got lost somewhere, but then the melt happened around, I didn't know the rock was under there because the snow was so deep. And so also the art becomes me documenting them. And so it becomes this kind of multifaceted experience. I don't think I shared any pictures of them. This is also a self-portrait. Oh, and see, this is after the thaw, and those are the ones that were of the very thin rice paper. And so I used that paper because that paper, I knew it would disintegrate. And so I don't even have to clean up after myself because some bird will pick that up and put it in a nest.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so it becomes a collaboration with nature as well, which is really just so much fun. Yeah.
Now, we also have a couple more staircase pictures that are related to some of the music you've shared. I don't know if you make music yourself or promote the music, but talk a little about the music side of it.
The music side. So the music side for me it's really new. A friend of mine, Michael Sline, reached out, I think in 2021, 22. There's Michael there. He that's him playing the very first staircase show. And he wanted to learn how to make a zine. And so he came over to the studio one afternoon, and he works in collage as well. He makes a lot of posters for his band. And so we just had a really fun time making and collaging. And then I have a printer, and we made and collaged and printed the zine that we made with our poetry, because he's a poet as well. And made that together. And then like during that time, I talked to him about music. And so I was like, hey, why don't we, it was kind of a joke. And then I was like, why don't we make a tape together? Because I had never made music. And so he sent me a bunch of stuff, and I did and then he sent me all these songs, and I listened to him for about a month. And then he came over to the studio again, and we just did that again, where we just, for like 3 hours straight, recorded. And then we made a tape. And I told him, I said, I want to do this more. I had so much fun. And he said, get a loop. And also I had shown him the staircase, and I was like, listen to the acoustics. And he was like, why don't you do a show here? And I was like, yeah, I've always wanted to. And so we did. And like, in a way, I had kind of limited myself in the way I was just talking about other people limit them. And I was always like, oh, I'm not a musician. I love music, but I'm not really a musician. And now it's like, oh, I can do this too. And there's Liz Galorn, who is an amazing, just multi-instrumental singer-songwriter from Danbury, Connecticut. I met them because they do visual art as well. So we met as visual artists, like doing a gallery show together. And then when I started making music, Liz is now in my band, which is called Angel Piss. And we have Sacred and Profane. That's what it means. And we have an album coming out in the spring, and it's a fully improvised band. So I play guitar, I do vocals, loop. Liz plays lap steel. I have a cellist named Martin that comes in. I have a person named Jordan who does vocals and synth. And it's an open band, so just Jeff has played in it a few times. Michael helped us record our album and played a little bit. And it's so joyful to discover, like in my 40s, that I can do something else. And, you know, I mean, what is art? Like but like just expressing ourselves. And I feel really lucky because I had already developed a practice in visual art and I had really studied it. And so for music, I have completely different rules. Like music for me is like, no rules, let's just make noise. And if it turns out good, then that's great. And if it turns out terrible, that also is great.
Yeah, you might just not share that quite as much with the world.
Why not though?
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna like it. Like what I've discovered about art is that like no matter how weird, esoteric, or strange, there's an audience for it. And somebody is really gonna love it.
So before we totally run out of time, if you want to tell people how to find out more about Magik Press, I know you do teaching workshop things,
Sure.
you have installations. How does someone find out about it?
Yeah, so you can go to magik.press, and that's magic with a K. I see it's on the screen. That's my website, and you can contact me there. And I also have a menu of workshops that I offer, but I also offer any kind of custom things. And because I'm a multimedia artist, I can teach almost anything. Like you tell me what you want to learn, and I can develop curricula. I actually have a lot of fun doing that. If you want to follow what's happening at the studio and events at the studio, you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook, also at Magik Press. And that's Magik _press on Instagram. And Facebook, I think it's just Magik Press. And I guess that's the best way to find me, or you can come to my studio. Right now I have an installation called the Unnamed Zine Library, and it's actually a small little extra suite that's attached to my studio, and it's filled with a bunch of zines. And from Tuesday to Thursdays from 10 until 2, you can come by. And
You'll have to give the address.
Yeah, 165 State Street, New London, Suite 208. But please, if you're going to come by, give me a holler. Like, if you got my text me. If you're on Instagram me. Email me. You can get my email on my website. Just let me know, because I work in the building at the Visual Art Library as well. And so I might not be on the second floor. I might be on the 4th floor. But my studio is on the 2nd floor. And I'd really, I created this space to share. So please come share it. And I don't even have to be there. You can just read my books, and I'll leave you alone.
And we didn't even talk at all about the Visual Arts Library.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Allie, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
As I said to the Art Reach people, I can't believe we never did this before. But
yeah,
I'm glad we did it now.
Yeah.
And next week will be totally different. We're going to have Regina and Brad on from, respectively, the Southeast Connecticut Community Land Trust and Fiddleheads, talking about some upcoming events in both their organizations. And so we'll be talking about, I don't know, food and housing.
Yeah, well, that's important too.
It is. So thank you. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you
for having
all
me.
next week.
Free Palestine.
When the rain don't